Good evening, everyone. Tonight's parsha is Parshas Korach. Korach is the parsha that deals with a man named Korach who led a rebellion, who quarreled, argued with Moshe about his choice of Aaron, his brother, being the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. God had directed Moshe to do so. Korach challenged that, and he created strife and quarreling within the Jewish people. The story is told of a young rabbi in his first position in an old shul with senior citizens as the congregants. And his first Shabbos there was the Shabbos following Pesach, which is Shabbos Mevarchim of Chodesh Iyar. Shabbos Mevarchim is the Shabbos we say the Birchas HaChodesh, the blessing for the new month. And it was the month of Iyar. For the month of Iyar, which follows after the month of Nisan, the month in which Pesach takes place. Now, every Shabbos, we, after reading the Haftarah, and we begin, and we're finishing Shachris, the morning service, and about to start Musaf, we say Yukum Purkin, 3 paragraphs, 2 Yukum Purkin, 1 Mishabeirach, 3 paragraphs. Then we say a prayer called Av HaRachamim. Av HaRachamim was a prayer that was composed to remember the communities that were wiped out during the Crusades. And the halacha is that any kind of Shabbos, any kind of joyous Shabbos, we leave out Av HaRachamim. And Shabbos Mevarchim, the Shabbos that comes before Rosh Chodesh, where we say the Birchas HaChodesh, that is considered a joyous time, and therefore Av HaRachamim is left out then, unless we're talking about the period between Pesach and Shavuos, which is the period of Sfiras for Asa Omer. It's a period of mourning for the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who passed away. It's also that during this period of time is when the worst of the Crusades against the Jewish communities took place. And therefore, a common practice is to say Av HaRachamim even on Shabbos Mevarchim in between Pesach and Shavuos during this period of Sfira. So the new rabbi was asked to do the Birchas HaChodesh, as we say, bench Rosh Chodesh. And after he finished benching Rosh Chodesh, he began saying Av HaRachamim. All of a sudden, the president comes screaming, says, no, you don't say Bercha, you don't say Av HaRachamim. It's Shabbos Mevarchim. We bench Rosh Chodesh. And the vice president says, no, what are you talking about? It's Sfira. During Sfira, you say Av HaRachamim. The treasurer then piped in and said, no, what are you talking about? It's Shabbos Mevarchim. You don't say Av HaRachamim Shabbos Mevarchim. And the Gabbai said, but we always did. We always said Av HaRachamim during Sfira. For 5 minutes, the fighting went on back and forth. We do, we don't. The young rabbi is just standing there. Finally, after 5 minutes of back and forth, they all break out in a big smile. They go over to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, continue what we were planning on doing. The rabbi wasn't going to do that. So I had to walk over to the old shamus, of the shul, and said to him, tell me, what is the minhag? What is the practice of the shul regarding saying Av HaRachamim during Sfira? The shamus smiled, a great big smile, and he said, our minhag is to argue about it. Arguing is a famous Jewish pastime. Very often it's for good. When we study Torah, we have lots of back and forth. We have arguing over its meaning, its understanding. But sometimes the arguing is not for good. And when it's not for good, the consequences are not good. Look at Korach. He led what's called a machlokes, an argument against Moshe, brought strife within the Jewish people, and eventually he was swallowed up in the land. That's an example for what can happen when people fall into arguments, into fights, into disputes that shouldn't happen. If arguments would end like they do in our story, that after fighting with each other, they smile at each other, we'd be a lot. The world would be in a lot better shape if that's what would happen after every argument that takes place. Now, when Korach and his followers, it was Korach, 2 men that made Dasan and Aviram, 200 other 50 men, great men, who came and challenged Moshe. So Moshe actually tried to persuade them to give up their fight. And he spoke to Korach and to his followers. And then he wanted to speak to Dasan and Aviram. And the Torah tells us, Vayishlach Moshe, and Moshe sent L'kro Dasan and Aviram b'nei Eliav, to call for Dasan and Aviram, the sons of Eliav. Vayomer lo na'alem, they said, we're not going to go up. We're not going to come up to you. So Moshe sends for them. And they say, we're not coming. Why is Moshe sending for them? They're the ones who are starting the quarrel. They're the ones who are leading a rebellion against Moshe. But Moshe is calling them. Moshe wants to speak to them. Moshe wants to make peace with them. And they say no. So Rashi points out from the Gemara, from Moshe's example, we learn not to persist in strife. It was Moshe who sought them out in order to make peace with them. So Moshe set an example for us that if somebody quarrels with you, somebody argues, someone starts fighting with you, and they're in the wrong for doing so, you should still initiate. You should still be the one to initiate some kind of reconciliation. Even though you're not the one who started the fight, you didn't do anything wrong. But for the sake of shalom and the sake of peace, you should seek them out. You should initiate a conversation to try to make peace. I'd like to share with you 2 stories with Rav Moshe Feinstein's Zatzal. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his times, was the Pesach Hadar. He was the leading halachic decide. He was the leading rabbinic authority in the United States and world renowned. And, there were times where Rav Moshe Feinstein had to make halachic decisions on some very delicate topics. And when you have to make a halachic decision on delicate topics, there are going to be those who are not going to agree. And sometimes those who do not agree when it comes to delicate topics things can get out of hand. And they can start publicly disparaging the decision and the person who made the decision. And there was such a story with Rav Moshe Feinstein, where he made a halachic decision on a very delicate issue. And there was one other rabbi, a learned rabbi, not a rabbi on the same stature or greatness as Rav Moshe Feinstein. It was not a question. But he came out very public against the decision. And in doing so, spoke very disrespectfully about Rav Moshe Feinstein. That summer, Rav Moshe Feinstein and this rabbi were in the same vicinity in the Catskill Mountains. And there was a delegation of people who approached Rav Moshe Feinstein because a new mikveh had been built in their area. And Rav Moshe was in the area for the summer, so they wanted him to come and check out the mikveh. You have the Pesach Adar, the greatest halachic authority, the leading halachic authority of the generation, is present. So they want him to come and check out the mikveh. Rav Moshe agreed. He said, I'm glad to come, but I'll only do it if Rabbi so-and-so also comes. Rabbi so-and-so was the rabbi who had disparaged him. And nonetheless, he insisted that rabbi should also come along with him to inspect the mikveh. And it has been suggested that Moshe Feinstein did that because that was his way of showing this rabbi that he bore no grudges, didn't bear any resentment. Rav Moshe did nothing wrong. It was that rabbi who did something wrong. And yes, it was a rabbi. Sometimes things get out of hand, especially when it comes to delicate issues. Nonetheless, Rav Moshe was the one who he took the initiative he wanted to make it clear to this rabbi that he was at peace with him. There was no resentment. That's an example we're talking about. I'd like to share with you another anecdote of Moshe Feinstein to show how great people dealt with people who had insulted them. And there was another occasion where somebody put out a sefer, somebody had written a book. And many books that are written on Torah subjects, the author gets an endorsement from leading rabbis. And this book received an endorsement from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. And there were certain statements in this book which some people disapproved of. And one such person wrote a pamphlet in which he degraded the sefer, the book itself, the author, and made some disrespectful comments towards Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who gave an endorsement for the book. Now, a rumor went out that the Satmar Rebbe, the old Teitelbaum Zatzal, he had sanctioned that pamphlet. And when the Satmar Rebbe found out about it, it was not true. And he wanted to make sure that Moshe Feinstein knew that it was not true. So he sent a delegation of his followers to Rabbi Moshe to explain that the rumor that he had sanctioned this pamphlet was false, absolutely false. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein responded to his delegation. He said to them, I'm not aware of the pamphlet, and I'm certainly not going to accept any kind of rumors regarding the pamphlet. So one of the people in the delegation told Rabbi Moshe that he has a copy of the pamphlet on him. Would Rabbi Moshe like to see it? So Rabbi Moshe said, please do not show it to me. If I read it, I might become distressed. Now listen. Rabbi Moshe concluded, I don't want heaven to punish the author for having caused a Jew distress. It wasn't about, I don't want to see it, I don't need a heartache. I don't want to see it, lest I have heartache, and lest that cause a Jew to be punished by heaven for causing another Jew distress. That is how a great person, as Moshe Feinstein, looks at someone who disparaged him. He was so disparaged. Now again, he didn't hear the disparaging, but he didn't want to hear it. Why? Because he didn't want to cause another Jew to be punished by heaven, even the one that disparaged him. When we hear these kind of stories, we should take inspiration. Whether we can live up to be exactly like them, but it's an inspiration to see how great people deal in these kind of situations. So we see from the parasha how important it is that even when we're wronged, that we should make the effort to make sure that there's peace. Because when there's peace, there's everything. Have a wonderful Shabbos.